The April jobs report is out showing an additional 420,000 jobs added during the month of April, edging slightly above the expected 380,000. Unemployment rate remaining unchanged at 3.6%. So let's take a deeper dive into this report with former Labor Secretary and American Bridge 21st Century co-chair Tom Perez. Mr. Perez, it's great to see you again. We certainly have seen sustained momentum in the jobs picture right now. But what's your assessment of the labor market today?
Well, it's a remarkably resilient economy. I mean, we've gained 8.8 million jobs since the beginning of 2021. That's roughly 500,000 a month. When you look at the pace of recovery from recessions, in 2001, the recovery took something like 3 years. In 2007, the recovery took 6 years, and we're poised to get back to pre-pandemic levels probably by end of the summer, fall. So that's much quicker than we thought. Wage growth didn't inch up as fast as we thought, and that's fine because we're trying to keep inflation down. And it's just a remarkable. It's remarkable in its resilience, this economy. That's really the main thing I look at. And you never allow 1 month to be a trend. But when you look at the pace of growth since the beginning of 2021, over 500,000 jobs a month, that's really impressive. Now, we've got more work to do, obviously, and the Fed's work in hiking interest rates and all of that to address the inflation. Those are important items. But I'll tell you, for me, I keep having flashbacks to when I first became labor secretary. We were dealing with the plight of the long-term unemployed, people who'd been out of a job for a long time and they'd frankly lost hope. And we don't have that challenge this time in the level we had it before, because we had the right amount of stimulus so that people weren't left behind.
So then in terms of labor force participation, I mean, you would think that people are really spoiled for choice in terms of jobs right now. Why do you think they're not getting back into the labor market at the pace that you'd like to see?
Well, I mean, the workers have leverage right now. And I think one effect of the pandemic was that a lot of workers took a step. They got off the dance floor, they got onto the balcony, and they said, I want more out of my life. I want to be treated more fairly. I want to have more control over my life. I don't want to be told at 8 o'clock at night that I got to work at 7 a.m. the next morning because I got kids at home. I need more flexibility. And so I think workers, you look at, obviously record number of quits, but workers are exercising the leverage that they have in this labor market. And I think that's great for workers.
Secretary, you mentioned the Fed's work here to address inflation. We heard from Fed Chair Jay Powell earlier this week, and it was interesting because he started his press conference addressing the American people. It's not certainly a tone that you hear too often from the Fed chair. But what do you make of the Fed, of how the Fed is addressing inflation right now, and what else needs to be done?
Well, I appreciate what they're doing. And, inflation is obviously, the cost of a lot of things has gone up. The cost of a gallon of gas has gone up. The cost of food has gone up. It touches people in a very real way. But I do think it's really, really important to underscore, and this job report does help underscore this, that inflation is not being driven by an overheated labor market. When you look at what causes inflation, there are basically three things: labor costs, and then there's non-labor inputs like your overhead, and then there's profits. And there was a recent report done by the Economic Policy Institute, I believe, showing that over half of what's driving inflation have been driven by fatter corporate profits. The markups that companies are taking, whether it's soup or whether it's other items that they're selling. And so, I think that's something that we need to understand as we try to unpack inflation and what the drivers are.
Now, obviously, this is happening in a midterm election year, and consumer sentiment has been falling. When people don't feel like they're doing well because prices are going up and wages aren't keeping up with inflation, it makes people feel like they're not doing as well. How concerned should the Democrats be then going into the midterm elections?
Well, one thing I learned as DNC chair is we're still, 5 months out of the midterm elections, and 5 months is a lifetime. I learned that vividly in 2018. Thought we were going to take over the United States Senate, and we ended up losing seats that we didn't expect. And that was all about a number of things that happened, including the nomination of then Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. There's a lot going on across this country, and people are going to ask the question, is this president, does he have my back? Is he looking out for me? The $1,400 check that people got, the record investments in infrastructure, all of these things with every passing month, people are going to start seeing as they go on a summer vacation, they're going to see Bidenomics at work, because they're going to see these projects that are rebuilding and building their communities and improving their communities. Inflation is very real. There's no doubt about it. And the Fed is taking action. I think, again, as I just said a few minutes ago, we really need to look at the underlying root causes of inflation here, and it's not labor costs. The supply chain disruptions are very real. And that is something that we need to get a better handle on. And that's exactly what the administration is working on. And so, I think there are a lot of issues. And I think what the Democrats have to do, plainly and simply, is be very clear about what we've delivered on. All too frequently, I think we tend to lament what's on the cutting room floor when a bill gets passed, as opposed to celebrating what we have passed and marketing what we have passed. We've gotten a lot of things done for the American people. The pace of this recovery is faster than any recovery in decades. And we need to make sure we're telling that story. Again, what's about to happen in the Supreme Court, I think, is going to be really, really relevant to voters, because we're turning the clock back 50 years on women's reproductive health. And that is something that voters are going to remember this November.
And speaking of that, because you are running for governor in Maryland, so obviously an issue very important not only to that state, all 50 states, but something that you have been extremely vocal on. Not only do we know the immediate effect that this is going to have, but talk to us more just about the economic impact that we could see if, in fact, Roe v. Wade is overturned.
Right. Roe v. Wade is about women's reproductive health. It's about making sure that women can make choices about their own life. And Roe v. Wade is the tip of the iceberg, because the next thing the Supreme Court's going to tackle is going to be contraception. I mean, the legal underpinnings for Roe v. Wade and the rights that were established were brought to us by a case called Griswold versus Connecticut, which was about contraception. And this is a very real issue. I don't call it a women's issue. It's a family issue. And, my children and grandchildren are going to be confronting a world in which they have less rights than my mother and myself. And that is the economic impact of this. I mean, we've worked hard to increase female labor force participation. And this is going to, I think, it's going to have public health impact as we move away from safe access to reproductive health to what we know was taking place pre-Roe v. Wade. And so this is absolutely a women's issue, but it's more than a women's issue. I think it's an issue for everyone in this country. And that's why, you asked the question about the midterm elections. I think people now have to understand that there's a frontal assault on some basic rights and freedoms, whether it's voting rights, whether it's women's reproductive health, rights in the employment workplace. There are just fundamental attacks. Rather than expanding the scope of opportunity, this court is restricting the scope of opportunity for people. And I think voters are going to take notice. I remember vividly in 2016, a focus group after the Trump election, and this focus group, they were asked, well, are you concerned about Roe v. Wade because Donald Trump just won? And the consensus of the group was, oh, don't worry about that. You're fear-mongering. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and that'll never change. Boy, was that wrong.
Indeed. I mean, and as you talk about some of these shifting trends that we're seeing when it comes to labor, we're also seeing this shift when it comes to workers, when it comes to unions. We did see this letter from Starbucks. Obviously, they were saying that they were not happy with President Biden meeting today with some of these union leaders that included SBW Workers United. They're saying that the company wants its own meet and greet. We're deeply concerned that Workers United was invited while not inviting official Starbucks representatives. What is your take on this move towards unionization and how some of these, perhaps these larger multinational companies, are really addressing what the needs of some of their workers?
Well, rather than complaining about who was at a meeting at the White House, I think what Starbucks ought to do is form a table with the union and listen to their concerns. I was up in Baltimore 2 or 3 weeks ago where they took a vote and unanimously established the first Starbucks union in the state of Maryland. And at the time, I think it was maybe the 25th such union in the country. And I'm confident by the end of the year, there'll be 250. I'll tell you what I think the American people see right now in this renaissance in the union movement is people understand, once again, that the union movement brought us the weekend. The union movement brought us job safety. When workers have collective authority, when you can collectively bargain, it brings collective prosperity. And when you look at the polling, public support of the labor movement has gone up significantly in recent years. And that's because unions are on people's sides. And I think what's happening in Starbucks is remarkable. What's happening in Amazon is remarkable. And I strongly support it because I really believe that when unions succeed, the middle class succeeds. And by the way, when unions succeed, and we're talking about the job report today, people of color succeed. You know, African Americans are represented larger than any other racial demographic group in labor union representation. So as you grow the labor movement, we are going to grow opportunities for African Americans. And we still see those troubling disparities in the unemployment rate between white and Black workers, white and Latino workers. And so I think one way to address that is to grow the labor movement.
We do appreciate you taking the time on this wide-ranging interview. We do appreciate it. Tom Perez, the former Labor Secretary and American Bridge 21st Century co-chair. Thank you so much.